Shalom everyone, I'm Nir Menussi. This week's Soul of the Parsha class is going to be recorded right here in my office. I wasn't able to give a class this week, so this is what we have for now. We are in Parashat Vayera, fourth parasha of the Torah of Genesis. And a lot is going on in this parasha. It starts with Avraham and Sarah being notified by the angels that they're going to have a child, Yitzchak, despite the fact that Avraham is 99 years old and Sarah is 90 years old. And it goes on to tell the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and afterwards the birth of Yitzchak, and afterwards the banishment of Hagar and Ishmael by decree of Sarah. And then finally, the final story, and that's what we want to focus on today, is the story of the binding of Isaac, the very, very dramatic story of Avraham being tried by God to sacrifice his own son, his own child. And he takes Yitzchak to the mountain of Moriah, and he prepares the altar, and he prepares everything for the sacrifice, and he is willing to let go of the only child that he has from his wife Sarah, the one who's supposed to inherit him. And he is willing to sacrifice him, but then an angel stops him and tells him, no, you should sacrifice this animal instead, a deer. So this is, of course, one of the hardest stories to understand within the Torah, and one of the most challenging emotionally, spiritually, and there are many ways to go about it. The most famous explanation, and the one that's also the easiest for the modern person to understand, is that the story of the binding of Isaac is really a story of the way that it's the Torah's way to let us know that the God of Abraham, the God of Judaism, the God of the Torah, does not want human sacrifice. That's the message of the story. The story can be seen as a kind of argument with the world of idolatry, because the idol worshippers in the ancient world, in the all archaic societies, used to have, in special moments of the year, human sacrifice. And that was the ultimate sacrifice. That was the sacrifice that proved that we are truly servants of that particular God, or nature, or whatever it was. And it could have been said by the idol worshippers, looking at the Jewish people, or the Jewish tradition, that you don't love your God as much as we love our gods, because you don't sacrifice human sacrifices. And then comes the story of the binding of Isaac, and tells those people and us, no, Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son. It's not a question of how much we love Hashem. He was willing to sacrifice him all the way, but then Hashem made it clear that he does not want human sacrifices. And then you have a kind of very, very simple and clear message that is being conveyed. And the message is that we should be able to give up everything we have, but on the other side, the other hand, the Jewish God, the God of Israel, the God that the Torah is telling us about, he does not want human sacrifices. This has to end. So this is a very basic explanation, and modern people are very accustomed to using that explanation to understand the story. But of course, it doesn't run as deep as we should hope when we study the Torah from a Kabbalistic, Hasidic, more internal, deeper perspective. And in fact, there is a very deep, very beautiful explanation that goes far deeper, and it exists within the Zohar. The book of the Zohar is, of course, the most basic, comprehensive work of Kabbalah. It's very difficult to understand itself. It's usually studied through later interpretations, but the images and the basic ideas of the Zohar are extremely fundamental. So the Zohar tells us something very, very interesting, that's what we want to explore today, about the significance of and the meaning of the story of the binding of Isaac. But we want to broaden the scope and really understand this as a whole understanding of the journey and the story and the life story and the challenges that Abraham is facing, which really the binding of Isaac is just the final step in a far longer and more significant story. So but before we can understand what the Zohar is saying, we have to have a small introduction of how the three patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the three fathers of the Jewish nation, what is the deeper structure that underlies the story or the dynamic of these three generations. We can start with even with the question, why do we even have this whole multi-generational story of three forefathers or three patriarchs? Why wasn't it enough for Yaakov to be the first one? Yaakov could have been Abraham. It could have been just one generation. It could have been just one man that is realizing the truth of monotheism, and then is giving birth to the Jewish people, to the 12 tribes. But it didn't work that way, and it didn't take 2 generations either. It took 3. It took 3 avot, 3 fathers, and 4 mothers. That's another interesting mystery surrounding this. Why do we have to have, like in the Passover Seder, every year we sing Shlosha mi yodea, who knows the meaning of the word, of the number 3? It alludes to the 3 patriarchs, and who understands the meaning of the word, the number 4, that alludes to the 4 matriarchs. So why was it 3 generations, and why did it have 4 mothers? So this can be explained by using the diagram, the model of the divine Sefirot. So this is just 3 out of the 10 divine Sefirot. Divine Sefirot are the divine emanations, or the sort of basic model or structure that Hashem, who is above and beyond every image and every perception, and is singular and cannot be fathomed in any way, there has to be a intermediate level between this unfathomable, ineffable divinity and the world around us, which is the world of plurality. And the intermediate level is the level of the 10 Sefirot. And this is what is referred to as the image of God. The image of God is the structure of the 10 Sefirot. Now, the 10 Sefirot are organized according to 3 vertical lines. And the 3 Sefirot that we see here in front of us, which is, it goes from right to left, because it's originally in Hebrew, and the whole dynamic is, we should see it, it's counterintuitive to English speakers, but we should read it from right to left. The first Sefirah is Chesed, the second Sefirah is Gvura, and the third Sefirah is Tiferet. It's not the first 3 Sefirot, there are more before and after it. But this is the middle trio, or the middle tier, the middle level of the Sefirot, and it encapsulates the entire dynamic of the 3 lines. And the idea is that every fundamental dynamic or process within reality has to go through these 3 basic stages. The first stage, Chesed, is about, Chesed means loving kindness or love, and it has to do with giving, with being open, with wanting to spread energy and love and light to everything around us. We have to start everything in a positive note, in an optimistic note, and so on. And then the second Gvura in this basic dynamic is Gvura. Gvura means might. It has to do with the opposite of the energy of this outward spreading energy of Chesed. It has to do with boundaries, limitations, distancing ourselves from something, not just being close to everything and loving everything. We have to take a step back and see things for what they truly are. It's a more realistic approach to reality, not an optimistic one like Chesed. But both of these Sefirot are unbalanced. They go to one extreme, then to the other extreme. This whole process is really a dialectic. It's like Chesed is like a thesis, and Gvura is like an antithesis. And then we need to get to the third Sefirah, which is called Tiferet. Tiferet means beauty or harmony, and it's a harmonious combination of the 2 first Sefirot, the middle line, right? Chesed refers to the right line, the right-hand axis of the Sefirot, and Gvura is the left-hand axis of the Sefirot, and then Tiferet, harmony, is the middle axis of the Sefirot. And this axis combines the 3. Now we can see, of course, the names of the 3 patriarchs here, and the reason is that the 3 patriarchs have been the embodiment of these 3 basic modes of energy, or modes of divine revelation. Avraham, the first patriarch, was all about Chesed. Why? He is most known for his hospitality. He would open his tent in all directions. He would bring in guests. He would also convert, him and his wife would convert people to the monotheistic faith. So he was all about loving and giving. He would travel wherever he went. Especially he says that he would travel the land of Israel, and the direction was primarily south. He went to the Negev, to the south of Israel. South signifies the right-hand side of the Sefirot. So south signifies Chesed. So just the fact that he was moving and traveling all the time is a reflection of his tendency or his inner movement to be constantly giving and flowing out of himself, so to speak. It's also, he's likened to water. He's a sort of watery figure. Water flows and wraps itself around us and accepts us for who we are and loves us and so on and calms us down. Yitzchak, his son, the second patriarch, is the very opposite of him. He symbolizes Gevurah. Gevurah, might. Very unlike his father, Yitzchak never left the land of Israel. He grew up, he was born here, and he grew up in the land of Israel, and he stayed here all of his life. Even when Abraham was looking for a wife for Yitzchak, he didn't let Yitzchak leave the country. He sent his slave to another country to bring his wife to him. He would stay put. The main thing that we know that he did was to dig wells. The image of digging wells means you stay in one place and you go deeper and deeper and you dig. That requires gevurah. You have boundaries. You don't come out of your boundaries. You work within those boundaries. So, and Yitzchak was also the only patriarch to only have one wife. He was monotheistic. He was loyal to one country. He was loyal to one wife. All this has to do with gevurah. Also, when his faith is described, the way he understood God, then God for him was called Pachad Yitzchak, the fear of Yitzchak. Gevurah approaches faith and service of Hashem not through love, but through fear or awe. So fear has to do with Gevurah. It's love and fear. Chesed and Gevurah are also they symbolize love and fear. Finally, Yaakov, that's why we need to have three patriarchs. The third patriarch, the third father, Yaakov, grandson to Abraham, is really a combination of his grandfather and his father. He was able to be in the middle, to embody the middle axis, or in this case, the middle Sefirah of Tiferet. And he had both the chesed of Abraham, but also he learned more and more to have the gevurah of his father, all his interactions with his uncle Lavan, and cheating him and all this created this kind of balance. This structure also answers why they had the three, why there were four matriarchs, four mothers. Avraham was too unbalanced in the direction of chesed. He needed a woman who was more like Gevurah, and she's the mother of Yitzchak, and she balanced him. She brought him closer to the side of Gevurah. Yitzchak, on the other hand, was too much in the direction of Gevurah. He was too much Gevurah inclined, too biased in that direction. He needed a balance in the other direction. So his wife, Rivka, was more like Chesed. She was found by Abraham's slave, chosen by him. He represented Abraham, and she was more like Chesed, and she balanced Yitzchak. The final, third patriarch, Yaakov, he was balanced, but there's also a danger to balance. When you're too balanced, you can tip in one direction and in the other direction. So he needed two wives to balance him, one to protect him from not going too much in the direction of Chesed, and the other one not too much in the direction of Gvurah. Maybe we'll talk about this later on. It's not really the topic for today. What we wanted to do with this is to just show that we have these three Sefirot, and Avraham is the epitome or the embodiment of Chesed. So now we can go back to the Zohar and say what was the explanation of the Zohar. So the Zohar really says like this. It says, the story is called the binding of Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. And the simple explanation is that Yitzchak was bound to the altar. He was tied to the altar. That's why it's called the binding of Isaac. Akedat Yitzchak. La'akod, to bind, is to tie. He was tied to the altar. But the Zohar says, it gives us a completely novel interpretation, which takes us in a totally different direction. He says we should understand the binding of Isaac as the binding of Isaac to Abraham. The binding, the tying of Yitzchak to his father Abraham. Abraham was because they were polar opposites, because they were so different from one another, where the father and son were very, very different, the opposite. And in fact, Avraham had he naturally favored Ishmael more than he liked Yitzchak. Ishmael was more like him. He was more a chesed type, a loving kindness type of person. It's hard to understand, but that's the root of Ishmael, is that he was like his father, and that's another thing we get from this diagram. Of course, is it also explains why we needed 3 generations. Avraham had a son who was very much like him, but he didn't balance him. That was Ishmael. He had to be taken out of the lineage. Yitzchak also had 2 sons, and his first son, the one that we're told that he loved more. He loved Esav. Why? Because Esau was a figure of Gvura, like his father. His father liked him because he was like him. So he also had to be taken out of the lineage. Only Yaakov was balanced. All of his 12 children could become the tribes of the people of Israel without any one of them being pushed away, because he was embodying the middle axis. So the Zohar says that the binding of Isaac is really the binding of Isaac to Avraham. Avraham needed to incorporate within his personality, within his psyche, he needed to incorporate a measure of gvura, a measure of might. He was too much. Before we go to the next step, which is we can do. So we just said we had 3 generations. One of them did the first step; he was chesed. The second one added gvura, and the third one added tiferet. But it's not enough. We also need something called inter-inclusion. Inter-inclusion means we can't just have Avraham remain all of his life just a figure of chesed, and we'll say, well, the next generation will take care of it. We'll have a figure of gvura. The son will balance the father. That's not enough. There needs to be an inner balance within Avraham, within every one of us, where this also goes for all of us. We can say, well, I have some things that I'm strong at, and I'm not so strong in some other traits, but maybe my kids will balance me. The next generation, they will have what I don't have, and I give them what I don't have, and I'll try to give them. I'll try to have them gain it from some other direction. Like I'll get them a teacher to teach them things that I wasn't able to do, and over the generations, a balance will take place, will come about. And that's a good way of thinking. That's what happened with the 3 generations. But it's not enough, because we also need to create, as much as we can, a balance within us. If we know that there's a property that we haven't properly developed, that we're lacking, that we're not strong in that side, it's not our strong suit, but we need to make that suit. We need to have somehow acquire at least a little bit of it. So the 3 generation dialectic process is not enough. There has to be a balance within Avraham. So the purpose of the binding of Yitzchak was really twofold. The Avraham had to be tied to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak had to be tied to Avraham. Avraham was supposed to gain from this trial, from this experience. He had to exercise a lot of might, a lot of gvura. It takes a lot of gvura. It's the very opposite, the ultimate opposite of chesed, of loving someone. You have a child that you love, even if maybe you love Ishmael naturally more, it's still your child. And having to sacrifice him and give him up requires giving up what you love. And it requires summoning up within you a degree of might, of gvura, that nothing else compares to this. So that's what bound him to Yitzchak. He suddenly learned what his son was all about, because his son was all about gvura. By having to sacrifice his son, he was really being connected on a much higher level to his son, because he could suddenly see the world from his son's perspective. So this is called inter-inclusion. When one sephira or power or attribute includes within it an element of another attribute, this is called, and the same goes for the other attribute, this is called inter-inclusion. Both sides include one another. And the proof for this is very beautiful. When the story of the Akedah ends, when Avraham is successfully past the trial, God tells him, now I see that you are God-fearing. God-fearing, fear is the attribute of Yitzchak, of Gvura, of the left-hand axis, and Hashem sees now that Avraham is God-fearing. You're not just God-loving, you're also God-fearing. You acquire this attribute. And it's also explained, our topic today is really Avraham, but we'll just say this, that Yitzchak, it was the same thing for him. The binding of Yitzchak was the binding of both of them, the father and son, to one another. He was a figure of Gvura. But in that moment, when he realized that he was about to be sacrificed, when he saw that there's no lamb, and it's only the altar, and he's the one to be sacrificed, it is described that he willingly put himself on the altar, and he even put his throat willingly, opened it, exposed it, so he can be sacrificed. This is very hard to imagine all this, but the point of this is that he demonstrated a very high degree of love for God. It was not his nature. So he suddenly realized this is the moment it has to give him his life up, and he says, well, really, I really love God so much, I'm willing to do this. So he suddenly saw the world from his father's perspective. He was able to demonstrate love. Okay, so this is the ultimate story of Avraham learning about Gvura, but it's really not the first story. In our parasha, going a little bit before this, we see that another person who is within the family is also giving Avraham a lesson in Gvura, and that is Sarah. When Sarah tells him that he needs to banish Hagar and Ishmael, because Sarah is really the higher prophet. Her level of prophecy is higher than Avraham's prophecy. This is very established in Chazal, in the Jewish sages. So she realizes that Hagar and Ishmael have to be banished from the household, that Yitzchak cannot be raised properly with Ishmael present. And at this point, Avraham loves Ishmael. And also, as we'll see, he also has some love for Hagar also. And when she tells him, Sarah, that he has to banish them, it's another exercise, or another trial of learning what it means to have Gvura, because he wants to love everyone. He wants to love Ishmael. He wants everyone to be at peace. He wants them to grow up together in the household. And she tells him, no, you have to banish them. And Hashem reveals himself to Avraham and tells him, Kol asher tamar lecha Sarah shma bekola. Everything Sarah tells you, heed her voice. Listen to what she tells you. So we have at least two episodes within this parasha of two people outside of Avraham, and who are these two people? It's his wife and his son. It's not just two people. It's his wife and his son giving him very important lessons in Gvura. So when we look at this, we can say, so we're starting with the Zohar, who tells us the binding of Isaac is the binding of Isaac to Avraham. They had to be bound together. But now we realize we go one step before that, it's also Sarah. And that brings to mind the very famous notion that Avraham had 10 trials. Avraham had a very hard life. He was a symbol of chesed and a symbol of love, and he lived a long life. And he was the first monotheist. But being the first monotheist also means you have to go through a lot of trials. And so now we're come up with a new idea. Maybe all of these trials, all of the 10 trials, are episodes, gradual episodes, a gradual journey in which Avraham, the character of Chesed, acquires Gvura. So we said that just the whole idea that Avraham, the Chesed figure, has to include an element of Gvura. This is called inter-inclusion. Now we're going to another third level, a third degree or order of inter-inclusion, right? We have all the Sfirot, all the different powers. Avraham is the embodiment of Chesed. Now we're seeing, okay, but Avraham has to include within himself all the other properties. This is called inter-inclusion. This is the second level of inter-inclusion. Avraham has to have some Gvura. Now we're zooming in even more. And we're saying, well, the Gvura that Avraham has to acquire, that itself, although it's a sub-Sefirah, it's the Gvura within Chesed, but this Gvura has to have within it all the 10 elements, all the 10 Sefirot, because this is how inter-inclusion works. It's like the image of the Sephirotic system is like a fractal. If you don't know what a fractal is, look it up. It's this kind of geometry, very beautiful geometry, in which It's infinitely complex, and the more you zoom in, the more you see the same kind of pattern occurring again and again and again. So the Sefirot is also a fractal. Each Sefirah contains all the other Sefirot, and the same goes for the same sub-Sefirah. But the way it diverges, the way it's not like a fractal, is that it's not infinite. We're not going again and again to more and more degrees. We're just going. That's a principle we learned from the Arizal, the great Kabbalist, 16th century Kabbalist who lived in Tzfat. He taught us that inter-inclusion, we only go 3 levels. Beyond it is something we can't really comprehend or use in any meaningful way. So here we have just a beautiful example of this. Avraham is Chesed. Gvura within Avraham is 2nd degree. And then now we want to zoom into this Gvura and look at all the 10 trials, all the 10 Nisyonot, go over them one by one, and see how those trials built, enabled Avraham to really develop that trait, which is really the opposite of his nature, but he needed to do this. So like we said before, it's not enough to have generations coming one after the other and balancing each other out. We need to balance ourselves out within our generation. And now we're learning that we have to do this. It's not just one tiny step or one thing. It could be 10 steps or a long journey or a lifelong journey just to acquire the trait that's opposite to our natural makeup, our natural character. So the next question is, what are the 10 trials? So it's not a simple question. And just to show you, this is a website called Hamichlol. It's a Hebrew website. It's like a Jewish Wikipedia. And so if you know Hebrew, you can understand a little bit what's going on here. If you don't, I'll just describe it. What we're having here is a list of more than 10, because there are actually 5 shitot, 5 methods or 5 approaches, 5 interpretations of what the 10 trials actually were. We know that he had 10 trials because it says so in Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, a very famous tractate from the Mishnah, the most fundamental Derech Eretz, or ethical tractate of the Mishnah. And so we know we had 10, but they're not detailed, they're not listed. So there are actually 10 systems, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, Avot de Rabbi Natan, Rambam Maimonides, Rabbeinu Yonah, and Rabbi Yovadah de Bar Tenura. And you can see you can go over the list. That could be a whole shiur, a whole class in and of itself. But we're going to focus on what is here, the middle column, the Rambam, Maimonides, his Shita. Why? Because as far as I can tell, it's his list, Davka, that is the most beautifully, it's the one that the most beautifully corresponds with the 10 Sefirot. So we want to see, like I said, zooming into Gevurah within the Chesed of Avraham, want to look at the whole portrait of this kind of Gvura, all the trials Abraham had to go through. It's the Rambam, although the Rambam was not a Kabbalist, and as far as we know, he wasn't exposed to Kabbalah. It wasn't revealed. The Zohar wasn't revealed in his generation. But we also know that his structures are sometimes the most is called in Hebrew mechuvanim. They're the most. They can be aligned the most beautifully with Kabbalistic structures. So that's what we want to explore. So we're going to go here, and now we have this list that we're going to study. This is what we want to dedicate the rest of the shiur to. We want to go over each of these sefirot. This is the complete sephirotic systems, the 10 sefirot. Here corresponded to the 10 trials of Avraham as listed by the Rambam. This is the Rambam's Shita, the Rambam's interpretation. But like I said, it's the one that the most easily and beautifully corresponds to the 10 Sefirot. So we're going to go from the bottom up. Right? The Sephirotic system can be read from the top down. And then the first would be Keter, which means crown. Second Sphira would be Chokhmah, which means wisdom. Third Sphira is Binah. Again, we're going top down and right to left. Then we have Chesed, loving kindness, Gvura or might, Tiferet or beauty or harmony. Netzach means victory or eternity. Hod means several things. It means thanksgiving, acknowledging something, being grateful. Yesod means foundation, and Malchut means kingdom or kingship. These are the 10 Sefirot. It's no coincidence that this particular structure is called a Partzuf. Partzuf is whenever we take 10 elements and correspond them to the Sefirot, we call this a Partzuf. Partzuf just means face in Greek, but the idea is that this whole figure is like a human figure. So we can go into this some other time. It's no coincidence that this particular Partzuf, this particular structure, goes from the top down, because many of them, if not most, are listed from the top down. This one is listed from the bottom up chronologically. We're talking about the chronology of life of Abraham's life. Why is it no coincidence? Because Gvura is all about moving from the bottom up, right? It takes might, it takes Gvura. We need to overcome the power of gravity in order to go up. We said before that Chesed is all about it's like water. Water flows from the top down. So Gvura is like fire. Gvura is like fire that goes from the bottom up, and it has to overcome the gravity, so to speak, or nature. And in fact, when the Zohar describes the inter-inclusion, the binding of Isaac to Abraham, it says that the water of Abraham had to be inter-included with the fire of Isaac. So just like fire goes from the bottom up, so this entire structure, this entire map of Abraham's life, so to speak, is, or at least the story of his life, in as much as he needs to acquire the trait of Gvura, of might. So now we're going to go over them briefly and just see how beautifully it aligns, and also it will give us a new look at the story of the 10 trials, again according to the interpretation of the Rambam, Maimonides. So the first one, going from the top down, is Malchut. Malchut, like I said, means kingdom or kingship. And the first trial, according to Maimonides, because some people have, other interpreters say that there were trials before this, but the first trial, according to Maimonides, is the trial of the injunction Lech Lecha, go to you. Lech Lecha, from your homeland and your father's house, from your country and your homeland and your father's house. Go from everything you know. He was kind of exile. So he went to the land of Canaan, which is the land of Israel. It's the opposite of exile, but it's an exile compared to where he came from. He had to leave everything that he knows and leave. Why does it have to be with Malchut? Because Malchut is a very basic sphere. It has to do with earth, with this reality, with overcoming this reality and seeing that there's something above it. And also Malchut includes within the word Malchut, includes within it the word Lech. Lech Lecha, go to you, walking. The king needs to lead the other people. This is called Leholich. It comes from the same root, same verb as to go, to walk, to have others walk behind you, to lead them. This is Malchut. So Malchut is, and also Malchut is about accepting the yoke of heaven. The yoke of heaven is called the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. It's realizing there's a king above me. He's telling me what to do. So the first Nisayon, it's very beautiful. The first Nisayon is walking away from what I know, looking upward, seeing that there's a king above me. This is Malchut. Second trial. Second trial is just after Abraham and Sarah come to the land of Canaan. Just a few verses later, there's suddenly hunger, and they have to go to Egypt because there's nothing to eat in Canaan. This is, of course, a sort of premonition or a foreshadowing of the story of Yosef. Yosef descended to Egypt, and then afterwards a hunger began, and all of his brothers had to come to Egypt and ask him to give them bread, and he gave them bread. And Yosef is a symbol of this Sephirah. The Sephirah of Yesod is, each Sephirah is connected to another figure in Jewish history. Yesod is symbolized by Yosef. Yesod is all about having a connecting, having a channel of connection that gives me energy or sustenance from above. Yesod feeds me. It's like something that gives me sustenance from above. Malchut is me standing hungry and helpless and looking upwards, and Yesod is about connecting to a source of, of energy or power that's higher than me and that gives me. So Egypt is historically what gave physical sustenance to Israel in these two stories, in the story of the hunger in the time of Abraham, later on again in the time of his grandson. So Yesod is beautifully fits with the trial of hunger and then going to Egypt, and again foreshadows the descent to Egypt by Yosef, the symbol of Yesod. Third trial, according to this list, once in Egypt, Sarah is taken by Pharaoh. And this corresponds to Hod. Hod is the sphira of, like I said, acknowledging and praying, echoing to Hashem. The word for echo in Hebrew is hed, it has to do with Hod. That I'm helpless, I don't know what I can do, it's in your power to help me. And indeed, Abraham was very powerless. It's the most powerless moment maybe of his life, that he can't do anything about this. And also Hod is a feminine sephira. It has to do, so this is why this trial has to do with his wife, with Sarah. So we'll compare this later when Sarah is taken by another king. It's a very different situation. In this situation, all Abraham can do is pray that she would be saved, and indeed that's what happens. And he gains all of his power, all of his wealth through this. At this moment, he has nothing. This Hod is when we have nothing and we can just look up to God, and this is the situation. Fourth trial, the battle with the kings. Abraham comes back to the land of Canaan, and he's very rich and he's very powerful, and then his nephew is being taken captive and is embroiled in a large battle between 4 kings and 5 kings. And Abraham has to do battle with the 4 kings in order to rescue his nephew. And this is, again, beautifully goes with Netzach. Netzach, like I said, means victory and also eternity, because true victory is everlasting, or at least it lasts more than it's not transient, because otherwise it's not a real victory. It has to stand the test of time. So Netzach is a victory. It's beautiful. It has to go with the battle. The battle is about, and again, all these stages build an element of Gvura within Abraham. So the first one, he had to have the Gvura, the might to leave his country. Then he had to acquire the might to leave his new country and go to Egypt. Then he had to acquire the might of praying and being helpless regarding his wife being taken to Pharaoh. Now he has to acquire the might of battle, going to battle. Fifth stage, fifth trial. This is very, very interesting. It's the marriage to Hagar. Sarah has no children. She asks Abraham to take her maidservant, and the child that would come out of them would be considered Sarah's child. So why is this interesting? Because the Maimonides is the only one to list this as a trial. All the other four, here they are. This is the one here, Nisuin with Hagar, the marriage to Hagar. Only the Rambam considers this. It's the 5th stage, but the other 4 interpreters don't even see this as a trial. They say it's no big trial. It's but it's beautiful that the Rambam absolutely is original. That he thinks this. He thinks he's not just monotheistic. He's also monogamous, like his son Yitzchak is going to be all of his life. He wanted to be monogamous, and it was a big nisayon for him. He had to have a lot of gvura, a lot of might, to be with another woman. It wasn't easy for him. He was a trial that he had to go. And why is it tiferet? There's a very beautiful verse which says, "Ketiferet adam lashevet bait." The harmony or beauty of a man is to be at home, and home symbolizes the wife. This is, again, a very basic sort of symbol, that the home is a symbol of the wife. Ishto zo beito, it says in the Gemara, or in the Mishnah. So, Ketiferet Adam Lashevet Bait means that this was a trial compared to his inclination to be at home just with his one wife and have no one else interfere. Ketiferet Adam Lashevet Bait, it's the beauty and harmony to be just him and his wife. It's a perfect balance. And then someone else is coming into this picture. That's a trial. That's a nisayon that touches this place of harmony, of domestic harmony. Sixth stage, this is the gvura within gvura, the might within might. This is the inner kernel of gvura, the might within might. This is gvura itself. What is gvura itself? What is the trial that is all about? Very simply, just having gvura. It takes a lot of gvura, is to circumcise yourself. Just to circumcise yourself when you're 99 years old. It's not one else. It's not the netzach of gvura, or the hod of gvura, the yesod of gvura. That's just plain gvura. You have to circumcise yourself, and so that's very, very simple. That this is circumcision corresponds to gvura. Next one, chesed. Chesed is another nisayon, another trial, very similar to the one we had here. Right here we had Sarah taken by Pharaoh. Now we have chesed. So it's another again taken by a king, but by a very, very different type of king, who is Avimelech. Why is this different? Pharaoh is a very distant, we have a long history of battles with the pharaohs. They're very far away, they could be very cruel. And also, at that point, Abraham was powerless. He had no money, he had no position. He was in a foreign country. Now, Abraham is in a totally different situation. Avimelech is also a totally different king. He's a very good king. He loves Hashem. He's a king of chesed. He associated with the Kohanim, with the original. He's called the Kohen. Kohanim are figures of Chesed. And when he realizes that the woman he took was Abraham's wife, he immediately regrets it. He merits to have God revealed to him in his dream. And what does Abraham say when Avimelech asks him, "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife?" He says, "You're a very good kingdom, but there's only one thing missing in this kingdom. What's missing in this kingdom is rak en irat elokim b'makom hazeh. You're not God-fearing, and so I wasn't able to trust you because you have a lot of good things about you, but you have one thing missing, which is irat elokim. There's too much chesed there, and the fact that Avimelech has too much chesed really reflects the fact that Avraham has too much chesed. He needs to have another trial. Actually, they both do. Avimelech learns to be more God-fearing, and also Avraham is learning that he should be more. The element of fear or might, and be able to stand up, and not be and really not let more kings maybe take his wife. There's a limit to how much chesed you can have. But the confrontation with Avimelech is a bit like confrontation with today's modern, new age spiritual movement that are all about love, and being open to everyone, loving everyone, and then it could lead to promiscuity. It goes together sometimes, because when you don't have good boundaries, regarding your spouse, and wives can be taken by other people. Avimelech is a loving person, a loving character, but he doesn't have the fear of God. Abraham teaches him that and also learns that himself. Next stage. So this is again something very beautiful. Most of the interpreters say that the banishing of Hagar and Ishmael were one trial, one nisayon. It was just one thing. They both had to be banished. But two of them, which is the Avod de Rabbi Natan and Maimonides, split them into two different trials. The banishing of Hagar is one thing, and the banishing of Ishmael is another thing. So the banishing of Hagar goes really interesting with the fact that the Rambam chose to put the marriage to Hagar as a trial. So something very interesting is happening here. When he had to marry Hagar for the first time, that was a big trial. He didn't want her. He didn't love her. He only loved Sarah. Sometime later, he now loves Hagar to some degree. And now banishing her is also a trial for him. He got used to her, or more than used to her, we don't know. But now banishing her becomes a trial. Now she's part of the family. A trial in and of itself, not just banishing his son Ishmael, but also Hagar. Very interesting. So Hagar is the mother of his child. Binah is called the mother Sephirah. It corresponds to the archetype of the mother. Binah is, again, a feminine Sephirah, and it has to do with banishing the mother of his child. And he also learns this from the mother of his new child, from Sarah. It's the two mothers, one against the other. So that goes along beautifully with Binah. Chokhmah is the father archetype. Binah is the mother, Chokhmah is the father. Chokhmah and Binah are two types of intellects, wisdom and understanding, but wisdom is considered masculine in nature, has to do with the father image or figure, and Binah is feminine in nature. So Chokhmah touches upon Abraham's paternity, paternal feelings towards his son. So his trial here, he has to acquire another step, another level of Gvura regarding his fatherhood. His fatherhood is put to the test. Right? Can you banish your son although you love him? And of course the same goes for Binah. Binah was listening to his wife. That's the first thing that she told me. She told him, Garesh et ha'ama zot ve'edna, banish this maidservant and her son. That was the order. He had to withstand the trial of listening to his wife. Everything Sarah tells you, heed her voice. So these two sefirot are what Sarah tells him to do. And then finally we get to the final trial. The final trial is the ultimate one. It's the only one that's actually called a trial in the verses. He says Hashem tried, Elokim tried Avraham. He put him to a trial. The other ones, it's all interpretations. This is the only one that everyone agrees it was a trial, because they don't have to argue about this, because it says explicitly that it was a trial. And here the trial is that he has to sacrifice, or be willing to sacrifice, his own son. And this touches upon the root of his being. This caps off all the trials. This brings him, now I know. God says in the end of this story that you are God, that you are truly God-fearing. Why? Because you passed all the 10 trials. One of the interpreters thinks it's the one before last, but he's the exception to the rule. Most of the Mefarshim thinks this is the final, ultimate, last trial, and it's the one in which now we know that he has completed all of his trials, and so the story of Yitzchak touches somehow the root of Keter is a crown. It's above our intellect, above our head. It has to do with our superconscious. So now, this is, I think, beautiful in and of itself, just to look at all these 10 trials and in the way the Rambam listed them and correspond them, and just this whole idea, and it of course teaches also something about our own lives. We have to go through a lot of things in our lives, and one trial, another trial, it all has to do with building within us, with being able to acquire a trait that's not natural to us, that is the opposite of who we are, but we need it for our completion. But we also have something else, and this is what we're going to finish up with, is that we also have something very beautiful regarding the final 3, just these 3. We can maybe zoom into them and just focus on them for a second. Maybe even remove all the others. Let's put them out of the way, and just take a look at these 3, right? Yeah, right here. The uppermost 3 sefirot are in some ways the most fundamental, the most meaningful. They're, so to speak, the parent sefirot of all the 3 axes of the sephirotic system. So, and also they correspond to the level of the intellect. The level of the intellect is the head. The head governs the body. The head tells the body what to do. The head is more important to the body than the body. We can lose an organ from the body and we're still ourselves. If we lose anything in our brain, we're not ourselves anymore. The brain, the mochin, the uppermost 3 sefirot, they are really who we are, fundamentally. So the beautiful thing that we have here is that these 3 sefirot, right? All the other trials had to do with leaving your country, with going to Egypt, with fighting a battle, with having carnal knowledge with your maidservant. But these 3 have to do with the people closest to Avraham. The first 2 are his wife. It comes from his wife, banishing these other 2 people. his wife gives him, Avraham, his conscious, she challenges him on the level of his belief system, of his understanding of things, of his intellect, of everything that he knows or understands to be real or true. She changes, completely turns his head around, and changes everything, the way he thinks about everything, with this heed her voice commandment that Hashem tells him. Everything that Sarah, this also why Hashem tells him everything that Sarah tells you, because really, according to this Perush, this interpretation, it's two different trials. So everything she tells you, both Hagar and Ishmael. So Sarah reconfigures Abraham's perception of how things are. And there's a beautiful story that illustrates this. There's a story in the Gemara about Rabbi Ben Na was given the job of going over every burial cave in the land of Israel and then mapping it out on the surface so that the Kohanim, the priests, would know not to go over this because they're not allowed to go over something that's impure. And he went over every cave, and then he got to the Me'arat HaMachpelah, the cave in Hebron where all the patriarchs are buried. And he came in there, and he found Avraham and Sarah. They were sitting there, and Avraham was putting his head. That's how the story goes. It's their ghosts, so to speak, their spirits in their burial cave. And Avraham put his head in Sarah's lap, and Sarah would go over his hair, and it doesn't say what she did, but it appears like she was taking out lice. It's a very weird image, but it's a very deep image, because the image here is that Avraham is a lot of chesed, a lot of goodwill, and the goodwill is the hair. They symbolize thoughts that are coming out of your head, so to speak. So there are all these beautiful thoughts about Ishmael and Yitzchak growing up together and loving everyone in the world and so on. But she's above him now. He puts his head in her lap, and she has to take out the different lice or the different, whatever it is, this alien elements or chitzani elements that are trying to use this loving kindness in a negative way. And she tells him, well, that's a very nice idea, and when the messianic age arrives, then there will be no wars and everything will be chesed. But right now, I'm here to give you the voice of reality. And the voice of reality is that we have to banish Hagar and Ishmael, not because we don't love them, but because this is the right thing to do. For the sake, today there's this big argument about open borders or closed borders. And Avraham is an open border type of person. He wants everyone to love each other. And Sarah tells, she's his wife. She's not arguing, or it's not a political debate. She's telling him, I understand you, but right now we need some closed borders. We need some might in order to take care of Yitzchak. Yitzchak is to be the inheritor of the monotheistic tradition. He needs to be on his own. And also, the sages say, it was good for Ishmael also. They had to be separated for both their sakes. So when the fact that he puts his head in her lap, and she's sort of looking through his hair and looking through all his ideas and sifting through them and finding what's right and what's wrong, that's really beautiful. That here it's the two intellectual sefirot, the sefirot that have to do with the head, with his outlook on things, with the way he perceives things. She needs to rectify it. So we learn from this that our spouse rectifies, challenges us on the level of everything we believe or understand or know to be true. It's also an emotional challenge, but ultimately it changes us in a far deeper way than all the emotional or on the level of the emotional attributes. This isn't just the emotional level, it's the intellectual level. It's everything we understand to be true is completely reversed, changed, or rectified or balanced by our spouse. But now we get to the ultimate part. The Keter is, like we said, the final trial. It's the ultimate trial. It's the only one that's actually called the Nisayon. It's the one that afterwards Hashem says, now I know you're God-fearing. And it's the one which the Zohar chose to focus on when saying that this is where Avraham included within himself the element of fear, and the fire within water, the element of fear within his natural character of love. So we learn from this, again, something very beautiful, that our spouse challenges us on the intellectual or on our conscious level, but our children challenge us on a super conscious level. And they touch the root of our being even more than our spouse. It's Yitzchak. It's the fact that he has to both learn to give up Yitzchak and learn to love him more than he loved him before, because he loved Ishmael. He has to be bound with Yitzchak in every possible way. It touches, it challenges. Before this, he had 10 nisyonot, 10 trials, but he still didn't know what Gevurah really was. When does he learn what Gevurah is? When he has to let his child be who they are. The whole story, ultimately, is about parents and children who are different from one another, who are very, very different from one another. The father is chesed, is a chosid. He likes chesed, he likes chasidut. And his son, his child, is a different sort of person, at least for the time being. He's a character of gevurah, of might, of judgment, different type. And it doesn't even matter. It could be that the father is a misnagid, and the misnagid is the anti-chosid, the one who likes gevurah, and the child is the one who's we can talk endlessly about what's right and what's wrong, but ultimately, there's a moment that the parent has to let the child be who they are. And the moment that Avraham is able to let Yitzchak be, okay, you be Gevurah, that's how we interpret the giving up of Isaac. The pshat is, the simple reading is that he needs to sacrifice him. But metaphorically, sacrificing your child is letting him be who they are, just letting him, not holding on to them, and forcing them to be like who we are. And the moment he's able to say, well, I'm a person of chesed, and I like persons who are also persons of chesed, because they're like me. But Yitzchak is a different destiny, a different personality. He's a person, he's a gvura type, he's a might type. And when he's able to let it go, that requires him to acquire might. He needs to acquire the property of gvura, of might, in order to let his son be this character of might. And then this act of separation is, in and of itself, it's also an act of connection. Because when you're able to let the child go and be who they are, you have the space to look at them from a distance and see them not through the prism or the filter of what you want them to be and what you expect them to be. You're able to let them go. And then you're able to see them for who they are, and you're also able to see the world through their eyes, from their perspective. This is why the giving up of Yitzchak is also the binding of Yitzchak to Avraham. The giving up of letting this figure be a figure of gvura, a figure of might, is also Avraham, including within himself the property of gvura. This touches Avraham in his innermost being, even more than the trials of Sarah. The trials of Sarah were very close to this. They're very high up there, and she challenged his intellect, and he had to put his head in her lap, so to speak, and listen to everything she tells him, heed her voice. Everything Sarah tells you, he'll heed her voice. But the ultimate challenge did not come from Sarah, although some interpreters say she was behind the whole thing, like her spirit was hovering in the background of the Akedat Yitzchak. But ultimately it was Avraham versus Yitzchak, vis-a-vis his son Yitzchak, letting him go, letting him be the figure of Gvurah that he needs to be, and thereby acquiring exactly that same property. Giving him up and then reconnecting with him in a much, much better, much more rectified way. And it's really a lesson for all of us that our spouses challenge us on our conscious levels, but our children, they confront us with the root of our being, with the soul root of our being, and with the fact, and when that's where we're able to really be completed. Our children complete us in a very, very meaningful way through the trials that we're facing when we're raising them. The challenges that we're facing when raising our children are the ones that really complete us and bring us back to Osrovit and bring us back to who we are and who we should be. So that is our class for today, Parashat Vayera, and I hope you enjoy this, and I'll see you next week for Parashat Chayei Sarah. Thank you.